Hi. So last time we looked at cost plus pricing, and I pointed out that one of the issues with this model is it might not reflect the true value which you bring the customer. Cost plus pricing, it calculates the price based on what you want, not what the customer values. So today I want us to consider a different type of pricing model, and this is called value-based pricing. Instead of starting with what it costs you, value-based pricing starts with what it's worth to the customer. In other words, you price your product or your service based on the value it delivers, not the cost to make or deliver it. And it can be especially powerful when your offer is clearly differentiated, when you're solving a big problem, or where you can deliver a really big result. So the idea is that because the customer is seeing such a lot of value from your product or your service, they'll be willing to pay more. And by the way, when we think about value, we might be talking about perceived value. In other words, the customer believes that your product or service is worth more simply because of your name, your brand name, for example. And that's, by the way, why some people pay a lot more for a branded watch. The watch doesn't tell the time any better than a cheaper watch, but it does carry a particular brand, and that's worth paying for some people. Not me, obviously. Let's think about a worked example. Let's say you're a consultant and you're going to use a cost plus model, and your cost plus model requires you to charge, let's say, $500 a day. And let's say you're working with a client for 10 days, and so you charge $5,000, and you're very pleased with this. You've recovered all your costs, you've made a profit. But what if the work you do for the client was saving the client $100,000 a year? Now the client is $100,000 better off. How much would the client be prepared to pay for this? Well, let's be honest and say that you charge them 10% of the savings. So in this case, you charge not $5,000 but $10,000 for the same work. And in theory, at least, the client should be happy to pay for it because they're $90,000 better off after your fee. So that's how value-based pricing works. You charge based on the actual or perceived value that you deliver. So if it's so good, why doesn't everyone do it? Because it's much more challenging to use. What's the key challenge? You've really got to understand the customer. What do they really care about? What problems they're trying to solve? How they measure success? What they're really seeing as value. So being able to communicate that value becomes really important. Let's think about how this could work in real life. So this example it's a software company, and they created this really clever tool that automatically optimized e-commerce product pages, and they priced it originally at a subscription price of £199 a month, so only slightly above their operating cost, because they thought a cheap price would attract new customers. So they were winning customers, but not making any money. And then they discovered that for one of their clients, after using their tool, that client's monthly sales increased over £50,000. So that piece of insight, that changed their whole approach, because now they moved to a value-based pricing model, and they created a series of pricing tiers. Each tier was tied to different results: percentage of revenue, number of new products optimized, and so on. And their tiered pricing started off now at £499 up to £2,000 a month, depending on the size of the customer. What happened? Well, clearly revenue went up dramatically, costs stayed the same, profits were huge, and customers were happier because now the price made sense in the context of the value that was being delivered. The customer now understood the value it was getting, not just the cost it was paying. So I'm going to leave you now with some thoughts around value-based pricing. And when we come back, we'll talk about competitive pricing. I'll see you then.